Today I told my family about my queen, and the moment my words landed, silence swept across the palace. My father looked into my eyes with a depth I rarely see. His silence was not hesitation, but reverence. My mother placed her hand on her chest, whispering a prayer under her breath, as if the heavens themselves had opened to deliver this sacred news. The warmth in the room turned heavier with meaning, and though no one spoke for a while, the unspoken emotion danced between our hearts like an ancient desert wind that knows every corner of the soul. I told them about her grace, how she walks like the moon guiding restless tides. I described her voice, how it settles my storms, how it rewrites my poetry. I told them how she looks at life, with quiet strength and the kind of hope that blooms even in the heat of trials. My sisters exchanged glances, one smiling softly, the other blinking away tears. My youngest brother placed his hand on my shoulder, his eyes wide with admiration, maybe even envy, that I had found a love so real. My mother wept then, not from worry, but because she saw her son transform from prince to protector. "This is the woman you've been writing about all these years?" she asked. I nodded. And suddenly my verses were no longer hidden metaphors, no longer mysteries wrapped in rhyme, they were her, fully revealed. My poetry had always led to her. My every silent prayer had always been named after her soul. My every breath was already carrying her scent, even before she was mine. I saw my father stand, walk toward me, and for the first time in many years, he embraced me as a man who understood love not just as duty, but as destiny. He didn't say much. His grip spoke more than words, approval, blessing, and perhaps a silent memory of his own first love. "Then love her," he finally said, "like the desert loves the rain, fiercely, thankfully, and without ever asking why." We all sat together as I recited one of my poems for her. My voice trembled at the beginning, but soon the emotion steadied me. My verses spilled the truth I had kept close for so long. My queen, I told them, is not perfect, but she is perfect for me. She is not royal by blood, but regal by spirit. She has no title, but her presence commands my heart. I watched the words land in their hearts, saw my family bend under the weight of truth. Truth wrapped in beauty, beauty stitched with divine certainty. My mother smiled and told me, "I knew the day would come. You always spoke of her even when you hadn't met her yet." That made me pause. Had I been loving her before I knew her name? Was my destiny always whispering her into my verses, her image being painted by the unseen hand of fate? Perhaps love had been preparing me all along. Perhaps my queen was written for me before I even took my first breath. I spoke of how she speaks to the world, not with noise, but with noble stillness. I told them how she carries herself, as if she knows every burden but chooses to walk in grace. I shared how she sees me, not as a crown, but as a man. She loves me when the world is not watching. She loves me not for being Sheikh Hamdan, but for being Hamdan, the son, the poet, the flawed but striving man. And that, I told them, is the kind of love that changes kingdoms. My sisters wanted to meet her. They smiled in ways that told me they already loved her. They asked about the way she ties her hair, the scent she wears, the sound of her laughter. And for every question they asked, I had a story. I realized then how deeply she had intertwined herself in my life. I didn't have to think twice. She was part of every chapter now, woven into every breath, like a verse written by divine decree. As the evening sun fell gently upon the palace windows, I sat beside my mother and she held my hand like I was still her little boy. She said, "She will need your protection, Hamdan. Not from the world alone, but from yourself. From the weight of expectations, the pull of tradition, the silence of palace walls. Be her voice when the world grows loud. Be her silence when the noise becomes too much." I looked down, humbled, and promised her I would. Then my brother, in his usual jest, said, "You've been hit hard, haven't you?" We all laughed, and the room softened. But he looked at me with sincerity later and whispered, "Don't lose her. Not even for the throne." And those words clung to me, echoed in my mind as night approached. Because in truth, the throne means nothing if my queen is not sitting beside me, reminding me that every empire must begin at home, in the heart. I returned to my chamber later and wrote her name again in my private journal, beneath today's date. I placed a rose between the pages, the same kind she once held to her lips. I looked at her photo on my desk, not the one the world sees, but the one where she's laughing without restraint, sunlight in her eyes. I whispered to her even though she wasn't there, "They know now, my queen. They know you are my everything. Tonight, my family dreams in peace, because they now know the woman who holds my soul in her gentle hands. The woman I chose not just with my eyes or my heart, but with every memory, every promise, every tear, every stanza." Today I told my family about my queen, and they got emotional not because she changed me, but because she completed me. And in that completion, they saw a future written not in gold, but in love. Later that night, I walked the royal courtyard alone, my thoughts resting on how the truth had changed everything. The moonlight fell across the marble like a blessing, and I imagined her walking beside me, her hand gently brushing mine as she looked up and smiled. I whispered her name to the stars, as if summoning a celestial agreement, because tonight, my soul had become public. No longer was she my hidden muse, she was the woman my entire family now knew, and somehow, that made everything even more sacred. The silence around me was thick with poetry, as if even the air understood her name now carried a crown of emotion. I remembered the way my mother touched her heart earlier, how she kept repeating, "She must be special to make my son speak like that." And I realized I had spoken differently. Not just with love, but with surrender. My words had not come from rehearsed speech but from something much older, something rooted in soul memory. I did not introduce her as a possession or a name. I introduced her as a truth. And in this family, where image often holds power, that truth rang louder than protocol. Even the guards who stood quietly at the palace doors looked at me differently. Perhaps they had overheard, or maybe the glow in my eyes betrayed the secret now set free. One of them, an older man who had watched me grow from boy to man, gave me a subtle nod. It was the kind of nod men give when they know you've crossed a bridge and burned the option to return. That night, I was no longer a royal wondering if he could love freely. I was a man who had declared it boldly. I sat in my private chamber and wrote her a letter I may never send. I told her everything. How my family wept, how they embraced her without even seeing her. I told her how I described her strength, her laughter, her pain. I told her how I shared the moment she cried in my arms and the moment she smiled in victory. I wrote of the desert nights we walked barefoot, where even the sand softened under her presence. And as I wrote, my hands trembled not out of fear but from a joy too vast to contain in ink. When my eldest sister called me before sleep, she said, "Hamdan, if she ever needs a sister, tell her she already has one." I closed my eyes and exhaled deeply. My queen didn't just gain my love tonight, she gained my bloodline. She entered the walls of a family ruled by tradition and emerged embraced by emotion. That, to me, was the miracle. Not just loving her, but witnessing the way others now saw the poetry I'd always seen in her. I remembered something my grandmother once said, "When a man speaks of a woman with tears in his eyes, the angels listen." Perhaps that's why tonight felt divine. Maybe the skies had leaned in closer, maybe the stars had heard my trembling voice as I honored her before those who shaped my destiny. It felt like I had carved her name in history, not through royal decrees but through raw, unveiled emotion. And that is how I want to love her, eternally and openly. My mother, in her quiet wisdom, had already begun preparing. I saw her whispering with the staff, asking for fabric swatches, discussing scents, suggesting dates. She hadn't said a word about ceremonies, but I knew her heart had already accepted the arrival of a daughter. This wasn't just a son's love story anymore, it had become a family's unfolding future. The palace air had shifted. There was warmth in the hallways. There was music in the silence. I thought about how my queen would feel hearing all this. Would she be afraid of the spotlight? Would she feel pressured by the sudden embrace? But then I reminded myself, she is not made of fear. She is made of fire wrapped in grace. She was never waiting for permission to belong, she was born with belonging in her bones. And when I finally tell her all of this, I will remind her, you didn't just walk into my life, you brought the keys to unlock all the doors I never knew I had closed. There was something so sacred in the act of telling. For years, I had written verses in secret, called her the wind, the moon, the shadow beside me. But today, I said her name aloud to the ones who mattered. And that act felt like freedom. I had always lived with decorum, always spoken carefully. But love, when real, doesn't ask for subtlety, it demands thunder. And today, I let the thunder roll, and my family embraced the storm like it was rain they'd been waiting for. As dawn crept over the horizon, I found myself watching the sky change colors, just as my life had in mere hours. The sun rose slowly, patiently, as if it too knew a queen was being prepared for her rightful place. I imagined her waking up somewhere, unaware that her name had been celebrated in the House of Royals. I imagined her brushing her hair, tying it back, walking barefoot across her floor, completely unaware that my entire lineage now waits for her with open hearts. This isn't just love anymore. It's legacy. It's the prayer of my ancestors finally answered in the form of her eyes, her smile, her soul. My queen will not walk into this palace alone. She will be walked in by the poetry I've written, the promises I've made, and the people who now love her because I do. And someday, when we tell our children this story, I will say, the day I told them about your love, the palace walls became softer, and the world began again. So tonight, I rest not as a prince, but as a man who has honored the woman who healed him. The woman who didn't need a crown, because my heart had already crowned her. My queen, if you're reading this, know that your name lives on their lips now. You are no longer just mine, you are ours. And in that sacred belonging, you are more royal than any throne could ever make you. And now, here I stand, not as the crown prince of Dubai, not as the poet the world adores, but as a man stripped of all titles, kneeling before the one soul that unraveled the walls I spent years building. You made me mortal, and I thank you for it. You made me real. For all my kingdoms, for all the stars I have named, none shine brighter than the fire you lit inside me. My queen, I am done hiding. I am exposing everything, from the moment we first met, to this one, where I vow never to